Following the first two Pikmin games on the GameCube, the Wii came and went without a single Pikmin 3 in sight. But we did get two ports of the first two games on the Wii, and Captain Oliver himself even made an appearance in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. So although we didn't see a brand new game in the 7th generation, the Pikmin series was still lingering around, and it wouldn't be long until the Wii U's lifespan that we finally got to see Pikmin 3. Pikmin 3 was initially supposed to be a launch window game for the Wii U, but following a short delay, it released in July 2013 for most of the world and August for North America, which was around half a year or so after the launch of the system. Now, bear in mind this is a long time before games like Mario Kart 8, Super Smash Bros. For Wii U, Super Mario 3D World and pretty much any of the other major first party Wii U games hit the system. Before this, we really only had New Super Mario Bros. U, Nintendo Land and Game & Wario. It's also important to note that the Wii U was Nintendo's first game system to support high definition, and at least for me, it was exciting to see what Nintendo could produce with these higher resolution visuals. I mean, even on less powerful hardware like the Wii, Nintendo managed to create some pretty great looking games like Super Mario Galaxy, Mario Kart Wii and Zelda Skyward Sword, so give them a HD console and they could produce some of the most striking visuals at the time. And let me tell you, Pikmin 3 is an absolutely gorgeous game that still impresses me to this day. Now, the overall art style hasn't necessarily changed all that much from what we saw on the GameCube, but the increased power of the Wii U realises it to its fullest potential. Characters, indigenous creatures and interactable objects still use bolder colours than the background to make them pop off the screen. In the past, I felt that the dull colour palette of the rest of the world, such as the floors, walls and other background elements, made them feel a little bland. But that's not the case with Pikmin 3. The increased texture quality helps to sell the sense of realism of the world that is supposed to juxtapose against the less realistic and alien characters, and it works here in Pikmin 3. It absolutely sells the post-apocalyptic Earth vibe. Oh yeah, did I forget to mention that the Pikmin's planet is supposed to represent Earth after humans have become extinct? Pretty messed up, right? Anyway, back to the visuals. The fruit, which serves as Pikmin 3's main collectible, is so well detailed it feels like you could just pull it off the screen and take a bite. Furthermore, the game features several visual effects to enhance the visual fidelity, such as bloom and ambient lighting in the cave areas. Excellent use of depth of field draws your attention to what's in close proximity, while nurturing a sense of intrigue as to what is beyond. The game's water works very nicely. It's now possible to go below the surface of the water, and the water itself reacts appropriately to any live creature, rippling accordingly. Pikmin 3 also features a reworked camera that will occasionally fix itself on a location or change the amount of zoom. Sometimes this is simply to tell the player, hey, look at that cool thing we made, usually to show off the game's more menacing scenery design. Other times the camera changes to help the player by showing them the full scope of their surroundings or hone in on what the player needs to focus on. It's no longer possible to toggle zoom manually, but I never felt that this new automatic camera system was a hindrance in any way. It is still possible to rotate the camera, if you want to focus on something else. There was only really one area that I felt the development team overreached in terms of visuals. That's the part in between levels where the juice is squeezed from collected fruit. These scenes consistently and drastically drop frames. Luckily this isn't an area that affects gameplay in any way, but definitely could have used a touch up. I know the development team wanted to squeeze every ounce of graphical goodness out of this game, but I don't think many people would have minded if they toned down the realism of gushing juice. While we're on the topic of presentation, the production quality of the music has increased. The relaxing pieces are still here with the Great Garden of Hope and Tropical Wilds. Moreover, in past games, the more relaxing tracks tended to be the standout pieces, but this time, there are some creepier tracks that I think are just as good and mood setting as the relaxing ones. Take Vehement Phospat for example. This isn't the first time we've seen this darkness dwelling fiend, and the player has motivation to want it dead. The creepiness of the track mimics this tone. This isn't a one-time occurrence, most of Pikmin 3's music tracks work excellently with the setting in which they are played. I think I've rambled on enough about the game's presentation. Yes, this was one of Nintendo's very first outings into the world of HD, but HD wasn't the Wii U's main selling point, at least that's if the marketing was anything to go by. No, the Wii U's main selling point was the gamepad controller. Outside of New Super Mario Bros. U's boost mode, Nintendo had only really shown off its capabilities in minigame compilations. Pikmin 3 would be Nintendo's first chance to show off how much the gamepad can enhance one of their first party titles. So, did the gamepad enhance the gameplay of Pikmin? Well, to answer that, let us first take a look at the game's many control methods. There are three main options, each with their own set of positives and negatives and even sub-options. Firstly, there's the Wii U gamepad, which controls somewhat similarly to Pikmin and Pikmin 2 on the GameCube, with some noticeable differences. The first of which you'll likely notice is that the buttons for certain actions have been changed, so it may take some getting used to. What's also changed is that the right stick can no longer be used to freely guide your Pikmin along a path. Instead, it can now rotate the camera 360 degrees, a nice change from the previous camera limitations where you could only recenter the camera behind your character. The second major change is that the left control stick doesn't just move the player character, but also the cursor, giving the player more control over where they launch their Pikmin. This is a bit of a double-edged sword. What you gain in accuracy, you kinda lose in mobility, where it takes longer to swing your character around and honestly makes the game feel kind of strange coming off of the first two games. A sub-option with gamepad controls is to use touchscreen controls, which I found to probably be the worst control scheme. Only the control stick, L and ZL buttons perform functions, whereas other functions are now accessed via little icons on the gamepad. The touchscreen then sort of mimics the Wii remote control scheme, giving you more precision as to where you throw. It feels like something from an early DS game, and I didn't use it at all beyond trying it out. Then there's the Wii U Pro Controller, which is basically the same as the gamepad, not much to say there. The third option is the Wii Remote and Nunchuck. If you watched my videos on the first two games, you know how much I loved the Wii Remote controls for those, and it is no exception here. It's just as easy to point and throw your Pikmin at anything you want or call your guys back with a whistle. Because the cursor isn't tied to the control stick, there's no dead period where you can't move your character. The only downside is that due to the lack of a right stick, it's not possible to freely rotate the camera. In my opinion, that's a fine trade-off for more fluid controls on the whole, and the Wii Remote and Nunchuck is definitely still my preferred way to play. And this control scheme actually has two sub-options, the regular old Wii Remote or the Wii Remote with Motion Plus. Using a regular Wii Remote works just like it did in the new Play Control versions of the first two games. Wii Motion Plus is an odd and kind of cool case. The game syncs your position using the Wii Remote sensor bar, but it's possible to point beyond the scope of the sensor bar and even cover up the IR sensor on the remote altogether, and the game will still know what you're pointing at. However, like other Wii Motion Plus games, Zelda Skyward Sword comes to mind. The Wii Remote's calibration can go a little wonky at times. Fortunately, unlike that game, you don't have to set the Wii Remote down to recalibrate. Instead, I believe the game uses the sensor bar to track the remote's positioning to get it recalibrated, which at least doesn't break the flow of the game as much as Skyward Sword did for me. And in my case, I was sitting fairly close while I was playing Pikmin 3, which could have been the cause of my, albeit infrequent, issues. So is that it? Should you just throw your gamepad in the trash and dust off your trusty Wiimotes and nunchucks? Well, that's a yes to the second part, but don't go discarding your gamepad just yet, as it plays another major role in the game. That is the role of the cop pad. That's cop pad with a P, K-O-P pad. God, I hope the auto-generated closed captions on this video pick up that word properly. It's nothing dirty or anything, it's a device that was created on the planet Coppi by the Coppites. To them, it's like a fancy PDF, but to us, it's the reason that this game stands out from every other Wii U title in terms of its gamepad functionality. No matter whether you're using the Wii Remote and Nunchuck combo, the Pro Controller, or even the gamepad itself, the gamepad becomes the cop pad, which has a whole host of functions. The screen provides an in-depth map of your current area. Simply swipe your finger or stylus along the screen to pause the game and scroll around the map, allowing you to scope out the area and figure out what you're going to do next. The icons along the bottom provide useful information about the world's creatures, as well as short control instructions, or give useful hints on the game's levels, provided that you've found the hidden logs, of course. It's even possible to take photos at any time, should you so desire. This originally had connectivity with Miiverse, but in 2019, that's deader than the Virtual Console. The most useful feature of the cop pad is the Go Here command. With this, it's possible to select any of the three characters, Alf, Brittany or Charlie, who I'll introduce shortly. Once selected, they can be directed to move to any location on the map that has been explored previously. For those players who love the time management aspect of strategy games, this feature is a godsend. If you're skillful enough, it's possible to perform 3 jobs simultaneously and progress so much in so little time. On paper, it sounds like a fairly trivial feature, but it really helps to keep the pace of the game moving quickly and reduces the amount of downtime. For those players who find it hard to split their focus, this feature is completely optional. It's actually possible to ignore the gamepad altogether if you so wish, and I think that's why Pikmin 3's usage of the device shines. The game isn't designed around the gamepad. Instead, the gamepad is an accessory, and a very welcome one at that only serves to enhance what's already there. I play Pikmin 3 with the Wii Remote and Nunchuck in my hands and the gamepad on my desk. It feels natural to quickly glance down, command one character to head somewhere, and resume playing not a moment later. I also like that the gamepad produces sound separate to that of the TV. It's merely simple bloops and bleeps or dialogue from incoming messages, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. It kind of makes sense story-wise. The gamepad is supposed to be its own in-world device, but all too often the Wii U games simply mimic the sound of the TV rather than create something supplementary. All in all, Pikmin 3 has some of the best gamepad functionality on the Wii U. Okay, so let's finally talk about the game's story and characters. Since it's taken me this long to bring them up, you may have got the impression that it's not important to the game's quality as its visuals or its gamepad functionality, but that is most certainly not the case. You'll have no doubt noticed at this point that in Pikmin 3, Olimar and Louie are no longer the stars. This time around it's the Cockpites, Alf, Brittany and Charlie that find themselves stranded on the Pikmins planet, which they have dubbed PNF 404 and is currently the official name of that planet. In a twist of fate, Pikmin 3 opens with a cutscene with voice acting. I know, right, voice acting in a Nintendo game? They must have still had some money left over from the Wii and DS days. Our story begins in the year 20XX, around the same time Mega Man was fighting Dr. Wily for the 5th time. Basically, the planet Koppai is becoming overpopulated and is running low on food. After an abundant supply of fruit was discovered on PNF 404, Alf, Brittany and Charlie head there to, well, essentially steal the fruit. And of course, it just wouldn't be a Pikmin game without a crash landing and a separation. Which leads us into this game's opening tutorial, and I've got to say it's an excellent tutorial and a fantastic way to start off Pikmin 3. The gameplay opens in one of the best looking levels in the game, Distant Tundra, and the first character we get to control is Captain Charlie. Here's the shocking part, the first type of Pikmin we bump into isn't the red Pikmin. What? No, instead the basics of the game are taught to us via the yellow Pikmin. It isn't long before Charlie is attacked by an enemy and we switch to controlling Alf. Soon after, we're introduced to the red Pikmin and following a few more quick tutorials, the game begins proper. I absolutely love this opening. The player isn't given all of their tools right from the get-go, but they are only teased. Where did Charlie land and what happened to him? Before long, Brittany also makes an appearance. She can make contact with Alf, but she's also stuck and has to be rescued. The prospect of being able to control 3 characters at once is exciting, and it makes us want to head out and save those guys to unlock this ability. Different to the other Pikmin games is that these characters actually talk to each other, and through their interactions we come to discover their quirky personalities. Charlie is the captain, but really only by name. He's a level-headed leader who cares for his friends and wants to get the job done, but actually coming up with plans isn't his strong suit. Alf isn't as experienced as Charlie, and he looks up to his captain wanting to be like him. What he doesn't really realise in the here and now is that he basically is the leader. He comes up with the plans and steers the crew on the right course, and they'd probably be lost without him. Alf is definitely my favourite. I mean, just look at his little poem he wrote for his hero. Ode to Captain Charlie by Alf. Oh Captain Charlie, where could you be? I'm thinking of you. Are you thinking of me? You have long been my hero and now you're my friend. I refuse to believe that you've met a bad end. Brittany's not quite so sure. I mean, just look at that. He's so sweet. Brittany is laid back, less serious and a little selfish, giving herself a bigger portion of food every night. But Charlie has a crush on her, so what are you gonna do? Actual voice acting is limited to the narrator from the start. The playable characters speak in an incomprehensible language. I didn't mind this, the inflection in their voices helps reflect their personalities. The plot doesn't just involve these 3 characters however. What our heroes discover is that they are not the first explorers to have landed on PNF 404. Can you guess who was here before them? That's right, the Hockatations we all know and love, Captain Olimar and Louie. What they're actually doing on the planet isn't explicitly told through dialogue. Instead, there are several logs throughout the game left by Captain Olimar that can be found, and for the most part they're entirely optional, but I would definitely recommend hunting them down. It's not just for the sake of finding another collectible, but they flesh out the story in a meaningful way. And it's not just logs, remnants of the Hockatations' journey can be found around the game's levels. Alf, Brittany and Charlie even form their own opinions about Olimar and Louie and speculate about what they're really like. It's something that motivated me to push through the game to see what would happen next, especially as a big Pikmin fan. In fact, this is something that Pikmin 3 does much better than the previous 2 games. The story has momentum. In the past 2 games there's really only a beginning and an end, with parts of the lore added onto through things like diary entries and reminiscing. Pikmin 3 is much more linear than past games, as there are certain areas of each level that you have to reach in order to progress, but I wouldn't say that this is a negative by any means. The story is more fleshed out as a result, and with writing this good, that's certainly welcome. It's a character driven narrative, and with characters this lovable and not to mention funny, it works stupendously. I would definitely recommend playing this one to the end. So, with a limited food supply, how are the Cockpites going to survive? Well, to please fans of the first Pikmin, Nintendo attempted to include a mechanic that reintroduced the sense of urgency in the series. That's right, Time Limit fans, it is back. Well, sort of. This time around, the goal isn't to collect ship parts or treasures, but fruit. Collected fruit will be squeezed into juice that our heroes must consume every night to stay alive. Run out of juice and it's game over. Alf, Brittany and Charlie are dead-zo. Sounds like a challenging premise, right? Well, so did the time limit in Pikmin, and look how easy that was to overcome. Pikmin 3's sense of urgency is completely fake. Here's why. In the first Pikmin you had 30 days to collect 30 parts, and it was pretty easy to collect more than one part a day, meaning that it was easy to stay ahead of the time limit and complete the game. In Pikmin 3 not only are the fruits very plentiful, but there are several fruits that give you more than one flask of juice. All you need is a single flask to make it through the day. I finished the game with like 40 flasks of juice to spare. I know I'm a Pikmin veteran, but I wasn't rushing or anything. If they really wanted to make the sense of urgency real, they could have made it so that each of the leaders had to consume one flask each, making it 3 flasks per day on most days, even if they made this the hard mode or something. You can even replay previous days if you're afraid that you didn't collect enough fruit, which is something I didn't remotely consider doing. Basically, the game's sense of urgency is just pretend, even more so than in the first Pikmin game. It was a nice attempt, Nintendo, but in my eyes, you failed. Not that I think this negatively impacts the game, but some challenge, even if it was in the form of an optional hard difficulty, would have been nice. Nintendo attempted to reintroduce the time limit into the series, but you know what they didn't try to reintroduce? Caves. Yep, the caves from Pikmin 2 are no more. I never really had a problem with caves in Pikmin 2, but they definitely didn't exemplify how creative the Pikmin team can be when it comes to level design. The above ground levels in Pikmin and Pikmin 2 were the more interesting parts, with better puzzles designed around the different Pikmin abilities. And I'm happy to say that Pikmin 3's level design is top of its class. The levels aren't just these self-contained areas anymore. Each individual level is much bigger than in previous games, with multiple connecting zones. While some of these zones are just extensions of the level with the same theme, others may be their own little self-contained puzzles that will reward the player with logs or fruit. I mentioned before that the game is more linear, and that is true to an extent. Waypoints do crop up on the map that the player must visit in order to progress the story, but how they are accessed isn't always clear, requiring one to explore the land and figure out their options. While progression is linear, levels are not. Of course, it's important to go out of your way to pick up fruit too. Just like prior games, certain areas or objects will constantly pop up that cannot be accessed on the first run through of a level, and can only be accessed after acquiring a certain type of Pikmin. I've gone on long enough without bringing the new guys up, so let's finally get into the rock and winged Pikmin. Unlike previous Pikmin games, these new types are much more interesting than what we've seen prior. Rock Pikmin are obviously much sturdier than other types. They cannot latch onto enemies and can only deal damage on impact, and can also be used to smash open walls of glass or crystals, which is very satisfying to do. Winged Pikmin are extremely weak against most enemies, but are much more useful against airborne foes. As the name implies, they can fly, which grants them the ability to pluck fluke weeds, hold fences in the air, and they are much better at transporting objects back to the base. They can even hover over water, meaning that you can finally cross over ponds with more than just blue Pikmin. These are both excellent types that add more variety to the game than any other type, I feel. Reds, yellows and blues also return with some additional improvements. Yellows can now team up to power electrical objects. Thanks to the increased depth of the game's ponds, blue Pikmin can now swim after their foes, which is very fitting for that type and fun to watch. The pace at which the game unlocks these new types is also pretty great. In Pikmin 3, new Pikmin types are unlocked after specific story sections, rather than discovering them through exploration. They are evenly spaced out so that the player has enough time to fully explore the uniqueness of each type before getting their hands on a new type. It doesn't just hand the brand new types out willy-nilly either. Rock Pikmin are the second type to be discovered, and Winged Pikmin are the fourth, leaving the player in anticipation of a new type for quite some time. Oh, and if you were worried that Rock and Winged Pikmin would be limited like purples and whites in Pikmin 2, don't be. They are obtained just like reds, blues and yellows via pellets and enemies. Likewise, the importance of Rock and Winged Pikmin is just as much as the other three types. Unfortunately, purple Pikmin and white Pikmin are not available in the game's story mode. It is a shame, but I believe that they didn't want to overcomplicate things by giving the player too many options. They do still exist in the game somewhere though, and we'll get to that. While there are plenty of new types of puzzles associated with the new gameplay options that the different types of Pikmin offer, they aren't merely limited to that. The developers managed to come up with clever puzzles beyond just this. There are now things like shards of bridges which Pikmin will build over time, and bouncy mushrooms that will launch Pikmin to new areas. Something new that I love is how there are several situations designed around the existence of 3 characters. Just like in Pikmin 2, leaders can be separated and go on their own jobs with their own groups of Pikmin, but that's not their only purpose. There are times when your leaders will have to be together, as leaders can now be thrown. Throwing leaders is something that can be required for accessing out of reach areas, for example, or solving weight puzzles. This kind of teamwork was something that I feel was sorely missing from Pikmin 2, and Olimar even alludes to this in some of his logs. When you're not throwing leaders, you'll most likely be throwing Pikmin, and the simple act of doing that has been improved in Pikmin 3 thanks to the new graphics showing your throw arc, making it less of a hassle to hit things in the air. It's also much easier to select and throw a specific Pikmin type, as it can now be selected from a menu and they don't need to be right next to you for you to grab them. Unfortunately, throwing Pikmin is a lot slower now than it was in Pikmin 2. It's a change that I don't know why they made, nor do I appreciate it. You also can't guide Pikmin on a path anymore like you could in Pikmin 1 or 2, which is fine because it was replaced with something even better, an all-out attack. Plus, Pikmin are just smarter overall in this game. They'll mostly follow in a line, which stops them from falling into water. In fact, if red, yellow or rock Pikmin even get near water, they won't fall in. They can only drown now if you accidentally throw them in water, and I wouldn't advise killing your own Pikmin, especially when there are other things in the game that you should be killing. Something I've always appreciated in Pikmin games is enemy design, in terms of both their appearance and mechanics. And for the bosses, Pikmin 3 retains the high level of quality and might even exceed it. I mentioned before that Pikmin 3 is more cinematic, and that's even the case with boss battles. There are a few bosses just hanging out in the world like the first Pikmin, but a majority of the bosses in this game are a bit different. They're treated as these grand set pieces, each with their own arena that they are encountered in, and they fully use that space. The armoured Mordad climbs up the walls of the hollowed out tree trunk, waiting for you to obliterate his armour with the rock Pikmin. The sand-belching Meerslug sucks up the ground around him in attempts to drag the Pikmin down with him. None of the bosses let up in Pikmin 3. They are all bigger and better than anything seen before. The greater use of space may make it sound like keeping an eye on the boss will be difficult, but it is now possible to lock onto enemies, alleviating that very problem. I'd love to say that the regular enemies are as enjoyable as the bosses, but this is where Pikmin 3 drops the ball a little bit. The appearance is just as good as it's always been, and there's plenty of new creatures to ogle at. Their attacks and how a player has to take them down isn't really the problem either, as that's still quite interesting. The problem is their infrequency and how their deadliness has been nerfed. Maybe it's because I'm coming off of Pikmin 2, but it feels like there are hardly any enemies in this game. When they do show up, their attacks don't do as much damage, or they just aren't as aggressive about killing your Pikmin. Growing your army isn't hard at all in this game, and during my playthrough I didn't lose many. I always liked the vulnerability of Pikmin. In past games it made me feel bad as a player if my carelessness led to their deaths. In Pikmin 3, I didn't get that. Not only is there a lack of difficulty with the fruit management, but in the general combat too. I didn't really notice this lack of challenge in my first playthrough, probably because I was just enjoying everything else about the game so much, but I definitely picked up on it this time around. As a veteran of the series, this was pretty disappointing. However, I will say that the game isn't completely devoid of difficulty. It doesn't feature as fine a difficulty curve as the first two games, but I will say that there is a difficulty spike at the very end of the game. I won't spoil it, but that section is one of the most well designed in the whole Pikmin series, not just because of its difficulty, but because of how it combines everything you've learned up to that point into a clever, cohesive marathon of a challenge. And hey, speaking of challenge mode. It just wouldn't be a Pikmin game without challenge mode. This time around the title has been changed to mission mode. And just like Pikmin 2's challenge mode, this one could be tackled by 1 or 2 players. And you know how much I love some cooperative Pikmin? There are 3 different types of objectives in this mode: collect treasures, battle enemies, and defeat bosses. All pretty self-explanatory. In collect treasure and battle enemies, players are scored for doing those tasks, and will earn a certain medal depending on how well they perform. On my first try of the starting mission of collect treasure, my brother and I failed to even get a bronze medal. That's probably not indicative of the difficulty of this mode, more so our incompetence. With a bit of practice, we did get better and managed to earn some bronze and silver medals. But getting gold and platinum medals is damn tough. That will really require you to fully hone your Pikmin skills. And here's where you'll find your purple Pikmin and white Pikmin, and they're pretty dang useful. All of the levels in this mode are brand new and exclusive to this mode, and the level design on display here is just as good as the story mode. There are even paid DLC missions too. DLC missions 10 to 15 are unlike anything you'll see in the story. The Christmas themed mission Fortress of Festivity is a great brain teaser. Just finding the Pikmin in that level is a task. A fun one though. And Beastly Cavern features some pseudo 2D sections. If you enjoy this mode, you really can't go wrong with the DLC levels. You can even play as Olimar and Louie in a few of them. Mission mode is the best side mode in any Pikmin game to date, but it doesn't stop there for additional modes in Pikmin 3. Bingo Battle is this game's competitive multiplayer mode, and it's definitely a step above the 2P battle mode seen in Pikmin 2. In this mode, the goal is to collect items or enemies on the bingo card and try to make a line. It's a simple premise that results in a very fun time, as it's easy to screw your opponent over by collecting something that they need. I think this makes the mode more approachable than the one seen in Pikmin 2. Pikmin 3's story mode alone makes the game something great. These 2 extra modes that are also enjoyable are just the icing on the cake. Pikmin 3 absolutely knocks it out of the park. Everything in the game exudes so much polish, from the quirky characters and the clever writing, to the jaw-dropping visuals, the innovative use of the gamepads and the fluid controls, the interesting level design and the interesting puzzles. I could go on and on. It's an improvement over its predecessors in pretty much every way. Sure, I may have some problems with the difficulty, but because the positive shines so bright, it's something I can easily overlook. Pikmin 3 is truly something special, and if you haven't tried it out yet and you've got a Wii U lying around, get on that. And the next time you play Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, why don't you give Alpha a try? Once again, I'd like to thank you for watching, and if you want to keep up to date with my goings on, you can check me out on Twitter at jamiethepayne, or if you want to see me play through games from my backlog and 100% some of the worst and best that the Sonic series has to offer, you can check me out on Twitch at twitch.tv/jamiethepayne. But until next time, have fun playing video games.